Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India. Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
In this session, we are going to look at developmental interventions and more importantly developmental supervision or developmental relationship at workplace as an important component of performance management system. In this session, we will look at performance management system, how it works as developmental process. We will identify the different types of developmental interventions or developmental processes, like coaching and mentoring are the two most prominent ones, but there are quite a few developmental interventions and relations possible at workplace. So, we will briefly touch upon those and mostly we will focus our attention on appreciating the coaching process, its importance, different approaches of coaching, and comprehending the difference between coaching, mentoring and counseling. In this process, I hope that the model and approaches of the coaching which we are going to discuss will also help all of us to identify our own developmental need. We must recognize that performance management and employee development are interlinked processes. So, developmental planning is the component, it is the joint between performance management and employee development. So, this is a joint activity which is finalized by employee and his or her manager. Personal development plans allow employee to answer these questions like how can I continually learn and grow in next year, how can I do better in the future, and how can I avoid performance problems faced in the past. So, it helps in taking account of past performance issues and delineating the path for himself or herself on the performance in future. If we look at the objectives of the developmental plan, and we are looking at developmental plan not as independent plans, but as part of the performance management system, they help in predominantly these four ways. These are improving performance in the current job. So, it helps the incumbent to recognize the areas of development and systematically working on those in the existing job. It helps in sustaining the performance in the current jobs. Developmental plan does not mean it includes only the drawbacks or it includes areas of development. It also includes what you are doing good, what incumbent is doing well in his or her job. So, there is a little bit of, there is also a component of appreciative inquiry in the developmental planning process. In fact, developmental planning without appreciative inquiry may not be fully effective, because people want to recognize, people want to place their performance in the broad range of performance, high performance or lack of performance. So, they want to locate themselves, they want to understand their situation in a holistic way. Because of that, an appreciative inquiry is extremely important in developmental planning. So, appreciative inquiry helps in sustaining the performance in the current job. It also prepare employee for advancement. So, looking at the developmental needs, employee can look at their future prospects in organization. They can also have better picture and understanding of their potential. This enriches the work experience of employees. People work not only for sustenance. You might remember in the OB1 paper where we talked about motivation theories. One of the very popular theories is ERG theory, existence, relatedness and growth. People work for 3 different needs, and so developmental planning not only looks at the relatedness and existential needs, it predominantly appeals the growth need of employee. So, growth need is the source of performance, source of motivation at workplace, and that is fulfilled in this process. Here I would like to give an example of Center for Creative Leadership. Center for Creative Leadership is one of the very reputed leadership development centers, which is not part of any university, but still features in amongst the best leadership development centers across the world in the Financial Times list. So, out of many popular concepts of Center for Creative Leadership, which we call CCL, I would like to mention these 2 things. Number 1, they have come up with a white paper which suggests that executive development is contributed by 3 experiences, the 3 types of experiences, and first is the courses, formal courses. 20% or second developmental impact occurs through observing others and following the role models, etc. And third is on the job experience and challenge, experiential challenges, action learning, key strategic projects. So, in my understanding, this 10%, 20% and 70% are more or less notional numbers, but they certainly suggest that time spent on these 3 developmental interventions, 3 developmental processes have this kind of ratio. So, in the development process, at least 70% should be spent on the strategic projects or the challenging projects. 20% energy and time should be spent on talking to others, learning from them, sitting in the reviews, doing the review process more systematically, etc. And 10% time must be spent on self development, self growth, and for that attending the courses, attending training programs. That is my take. CCL's clear assessment is that, so that is my take, but the CCL's concept is that the development, executive development takes place, the overall development percentage is like this, corresponding to different interventions. So, that is the first thing, first useful concept which we can keep in mind while in practice or while analyzing cases. Second concept is about leadership development process. What it says, that leadership development process results through 3 steps: assessment, challenge and support. Assessment means systematically evaluating where a leader exists, where leader stands in terms of his or her performance. Challenge is related to the executive development process which we discussed, that is challenging projects, challenging assignments, and only assessment and challenge cannot result into the, may not result into the development process. It also requires a support. A support can be in the form of expert support, can be in the form of coaching, can be in the form of mentoring and other types of developmental interventions. So, these are the 2 concepts popularized by CCL, followed thoroughly in their work, gives us insight about how performance and developmental interventions are connected. Challenging assignment or what we also call stretch goals are very important executive development tools. Stretch goals are important because they divert the attention away from activities that are not relevant to the goal and towards activities that are relevant. When we take up the bigger challenges, our mind become more focused on those goals which are associated with that challenge. Second thing is, challenging goals are energizing. We discussed that growth is an inherent need of the person. We can also understand this point through the Maslow's need hierarchy theory as well. You might remember the fourth need in the Maslow's need hierarchy talks about esteem. Many a time the challenging goal also appeal to the self-esteem of the incumbent. When they visualize themselves achieving that goal, their self-esteem goes up, self-esteem also their self-respect in their own eyes, and they start finding it meaningful, and that energizes the performance and that energizes the incumbent, and naturally they put in more effort, and effort not in the linear sense, effort not in the conventional sense alone, effort also in terms of being more creative, more innovative, more resourceful, more proactive in seeking resources, building network, etc. Stretch goals lead to persistence. When you have high goal, when you have the stretch goals, a challenging assignment or challenging project, one may not able to achieve it in the first go, one may not achieve it in the first cycle, but it helps the incumbent to remain on the path. So, many a time stretch goals work as pole star, we may not able to reach it, but whenever we look at it and we aspire to reach there, we take few steps towards that and we move forward from our previous position. So, in this way it helps to persistently remain invested in on the path of performance. Another point is that stretch goals motivate employee to use knowledge they have to reach the goals. So, as we discussed that stretch goal help us to look at all our resources, our internal resources as well as external resources, and we creatively see how my existing resources can help to realize that goal, to attain that goal. So, in a typical development plan, you have these three content. First, the new skill to be learned, that is identified, completion date of learning, goal without date, goal without timeline are not always meaningful, most of the time they are meaningless, because lot of ongoing things take over and they take precedence and they occupy our time space, and we keep the learning objective on the sidelines as a nice thing to do whenever I have time, but if I do not attach the timeline, then existing job requirement or my other requirements naturally occupy this time space. How the supervisor will know whether the new skill has indeed been acquired, that also has to be identified in the development plan. How it will be reflected in the performance, and that performance may include the hard performance if you are a sales or in operations, then in terms of the productivity. It can also be included in the form of my interaction with my colleagues, my involvement in the company affairs, my involvement in the community. So, we need to identify what will indicate that I have attained or incumbent has attained the developmental objective. Now, we will look at the multiple possibilities of developmental activities. These developmental activities can be on the job training. As I mentioned, challenging assignment and on the job training is perhaps the most powerful developmental activity. So, on the job training helps the employee to collect and appraise all internal and external resources to be employed to achievement of the performance. Second developmental activities are related to the courses. Many a time in the related to certain technical skills or behavioral skills, some courses are very apt, and identifying those courses, attending those courses helps in building our knowledge base as well as skills. Self guided reading, many organizations have started setting up a knowledge repository in the as a component of knowledge management system. They have also started developing the online knowledge repository, wherein LNOD team keep compiling learning resources. So, organizations can direct the employees towards those learning resources, and employees being adult can identify what are the things they would like to try, because they are the adults, they know their career advancement goals, they know their career aspirations or or things to be achieved or personal goals. These are the things we assume people are aware of, and for that self guided learning can be a very useful developmental activity. Coaching and mentoring, which we are going to discuss in more detail after this slide. Attending conferences, attending conferences has a immense benefit for the people who are working in some specialized fields. It can also be helpful for the people in the areas which may not be considered specialized, but at least there is some professional body, some body of knowledge, some academic work, some knowledge is available, systematically available for these employees, and whenever they attend the conference act in two very important ways. Number one, attending conferences and sessions can give us idea what is going on in my field. So, what is the current status of my field, what is the cutting edge thinking, what are the concepts which are most popular, what are the techniques which are most popular or gaining currency these days. So, we come to know about these things in the conferences. Secondly, we build a network, we build friendship with other experts, we build relationship with other colleagues and experts in the field, and they can be excellent resources for our development and eventually for our performance in near future. So, conferences can be sometime low cost developmental activities, because if you see a training program, generally consultants charge significant amount, an organization has to build a batch of the customers, an organization has to make the batch of employees, they have to arrange for the logistics. Attending conferences can be a very economical way of employee development. If we look at the typical training program, organization has to if we look at a typical training program, organization has to prepare a batch, they have to engage some consultants, and there is also a cost involved in staying of the multiple employees at a centralized or a similar location, and arrangement of their lodging and boarding, all that is included in organizing a training program. Whereas in conferences, few employees can go, they get the exposure and the benefit of networking etc., which we just discussed. Generally the charges for the conferences happen to be lower than the charges of high value training programs. So, that is economical, and people come to know large number of experts in the same conference. When you are attending a training program, you are mostly talking to one or very few experts. When someone is attending a conference, they at stretch at the same location and in a similar 2-3 days, they come to know, they become familiar to large number of experts. So, with them, with those experts, they can continue the conversation and they can continue the developmental activities. So, in this way attending conference can be very useful intervention. Getting a degree, many organizations in India at least, and other parts of the world as well, they have started collaborating with the reputed institutions, and institutions run degree program more exclusively for the employees of that particular organization. That helps in ensuring the organization that during the degree program, things which are more relevant for the organization, more relevant for the job of the employees, those get proper coverage, and at the same time it also works as a retention strategy for the employee, for the key talent. If key talent is engaged in the degree program, at least for those many years, those many days, he or she would like to remain with the organization. So, enrollment of the degree program can also be a developmental activity as well as the strategy for the employee retention. Job rotation is another developmental activity which helps people to look at multiple jobs, but that is not the only use of job rotation. Another very important use of job rotation is to be able to see that how my job is connected to other jobs. It gives us overview about what my organization is engaged into, and this makes my work meaningful, because there I see that how one job or how one job is not more or less important in comparison to other jobs. Multiple jobs are there in the organization. So, job rotation helps people to expand their capacity, build their perspective, and ability to see each job in the right perspective and be respectful for all the jobs. Temporary assignments we have already discussed. Temporary assignments and projects can be exciting developmental activities. It works in couple of ways. Number one, it acts as an opportunity for testing the water for the employee, and opportunity for organization to assess the potential of the employee. This also helps in pursuing the agenda for innovation. Many a time only R&D teams or the people in their regular job, they are so occupied in meeting their regular targets and following the process, that they may not give sufficient attention to the innovation. When cross functional teams are formed or self learning teams are formed, or individuals are given these temporary assignments, they give a fresh look to the process and that particular job, and that helps the organization to have fresh perspective. It also helps employee to identify whether they are interested in that kind of work or not, and many time it relieves the senior employees to remain engaged in that project, and this gives opportunity to the organization to try out new people for the crucial roles, for the key roles, or for the key projects. Membership or leadership role in the professional and trade organization is also very useful. We have multiple trade organizations, NESCOM, CII, FICCI, different pharmaceutical manufacturer association, etc. These are many, there are many trade organizations. So, trade organizations are involved in capacity building as well as in advocacy. In the process of advocacy, when I am involved in the organization, I also get to know the real situation of the industry, how other players in the industry are viewing things, what are the challenges in the immediate and the general environment. All these exposure, all this knowledge come to me when I take part in the activities and conversations of a professional and trade. Professional and trade organization also keep organizing the conferences and the learning activities and the functions wherein there is lot of learning opportunity for the employees, and that helps in exposure, perspective building, also networking. So, conferences are more of generalized nature, whereas the activities of the professional and trade organization are more specific, are of more specific nature, and both of them gives employee an opportunity to enhance their perspective, to refresh their perspective, build network, identify expert and understand what is going on in their immediate environment and their general environment. Performance management skill involves two very important things, coaching and mentoring. We will look these one by one. Coaching, that word comes from the word coach, that means a mode to take someone from one place to another. Coaching is a collaborative process, it is an ongoing process wherein manager interacts with his or her employee and take an active role and interest in their performance. Coach can be our colleague, manager and can also be external to the organization. The guiding principle for successful coaching, these are given in different words, similar principles are given in different words in various models and various approaches articulated by many thought leaders and very successful coaches. More or less they talk about these four things. A good coaching requires relationship. In a good relationship only coaching can happen. Coachee is the source and director of the change. So, coaching is not directive in nature, coaching is facilitative in nature. That means the job of a coach is to make coachee aware of his or her own resources, and resources not only external resources, as internal resources as well. The internal resources are the aspirations, values, attitude, his or her own skills, all these are the internal resources and that is the source. Coach is not an expert, and that is why you see there are very successful coaches who would not have been very successful business leaders, but they very effectively coach the business leaders who are very successful in their career. So, the job of the coach is to connect the coachee, connect the incumbent to his or her internal resources and his or her external resources. Coachee is whole and unique. It is not a coachee correction exercise. It is not addressing the problems in the coachee. It is basically recognizing the individual diversity. It is basically recognizing the individuality and uniqueness of the coachee, and the coaching conversations arise from this space, which is the recognition of the coachee as whole and unique. Coach is the facilitator of the employee's growth. This is connected to point second. Facilitation and training are two different things. Facilitation means having a conversation where coachee feels safe to connect with his or her own resources, can ask meaningful question, can address some of the powerful questions, identify what is available to him or her, and also identify where he or she need to develop or need more practice. So, that is, in that way coaching is of a facilitative nature. What coaches generally do? We will look at one specific model, but in general most of the models of coaching talks about these activities, and these activities are establishing developmental objective. Without a specific objective, without a specific developmental objective, coaching cannot happen. Coaching is not of general nature. Coaching works best only when we know what is the purpose of coaching, what we wish to develop in a coachee, then in that situation coaching works best. It has to be motivating. So, coach's activity is to motivate coachee, documenting the performance. So, coaching is not only conversation, it is about tracking the performance objectively, and that objectively means not only taking the sales data or not only taking the operations data or production data. Objectivity also means viewing the performance from the other's perspective, viewing the performance from the person's own perspective, viewing the performance of the incumbent in the light of the his or her supervisor's perspective. So the documentation of the performance can be of the multiple forms, but there has to be some documentation of the performance. And if we connect this conversation with our previous discussion on the developmental activities and requirement of identifiable change, and that identifiable change is anyway integral part of the developmental plan, and that has to be there, and that happens to be there in good coaching situations. It involves feedback, and that feedback can be discomforting as well, but it is the activity of a coach. Diagnosing the performance problems. Coach also helps in identifying the reasons for lack of performance of the incumbent in certain situations. Diagnosis in the medical sense is different in comparison to what we understand diagnosis in the coaching relationship. In the medical sense, generally diagnosis is the one way process, wherein expert, a pathologist or a physician or a medical professional, they have more knowledge, and it is accepted that they know about the phenomena better, they know much more, and they pinpoint, they identify what is not working, what is the problem in the patient. Diagnosis in the coaching is not one way path. Diagnosis in the coaching is two way path, it is a collaborative process. So, coach generally propose something, they give their reading, they give their assessment, but they are also open to listen to what coachee has to say about that observation. So, it is a collaborative process, and in that way diagnosis is slightly different in coaching in comparison to the diagnosis we see in the medical professions or medical situations. Last but not the least, in fact rather it is the most important, the ultimate activity of a coach is to develop employee. Giving feedback is a very important activity of coaching process. When it is done properly, feedback can be relabeled feed forward. We will look at feed forward in more detail little later, but here we must understand that feedback serves following important purposes. It helps in building confidence, it develops the competence, and it enhances the involvement. Feedback is also a good feedback is also a kind attention to the employee, and that attention helps the employee to build confidence, and it enhances the involvement. Remember Hawthorne experiment. There has to be certain qualities in the feedback. So, feedback must follow some timeliness. Feedback should be given at the right time. In a very high crisis situation, feedback may not work best, but in a moderate situation, giving feedback at the time of performance makes people register it quickly and more seriously. Frequency of the feedback is important. It has to be optimal. Frequency cannot be very high for the about the feedback. Participant or incumbent may feel frustrated or puzzled about the whole situation, and frequency should also be not so minimal, wherein we do not just repeat it weeks after weeks or months after month, and that goes out of sight of the coachee. Specificity is the essence of feedback. Giving the general feedback that you are like this and your personality is like this have to come much later. The conversation, the feedback conversation must start with some specific data, specific event, specific situation or a specific behavior. Verifiability. When we use the data, when we use the specific information, there has to be an element of verification, means incumbent about whom we are giving feedback should be able to verify it through data or through other observers. Consistency, Here it is related to feedback about certain thing. If we keep giving feedback about the multiple and so many aspects of the incumbent's performance, they may feel confused. So, for a specific time period, we need to consistently follow few aspects of performance, and feedback should also be focused on those aspects of performance. Once those are met, we can look at another set of performance criteria and feedback can be given on those criteria, but coaching works most effectively only when it is focused on 2 or 3 objectives and consistently those objectives are kept in mind in the coaching conversations. Privacy, the old law, praise in public, criticize in private, that works in any feedback situation. Consequences also must be understood correctly, how person will take it, and also in terms of what will be the consequences if person or incumbent follows the feedback, and that has to be discussed with the incumbent. Description first, evaluation second, that is related to the specificity and verifiability. Evaluation we say must be avoided to the extent possible, though practically most of the time feedback gives us impression about being evaluated, but if it has all these other elements, it still works as a developmental intervention. It need to look at the performance as a continuum. Performance need not to be or should not be looked at in most of the situation in a binary form, it is there or not there. Most of the job, most of the people are located in the performance continuum, where they are somewhere in the performance and from there they can move ahead, and that journey can be very long term. So, it is not a binary situation, but performance has to be understood in most of the situation as a continuum, and in the feedback we need to take account of this situation, we need to take account of this nature of performance. Pattern identification, instead of giving the atomistic data even frequently or pointing out too many things regularly, even regularly or very frequently, that may not be a very effective way of coaching. It is always good to look at the multiple data points for a coach and to identify the pattern of the performance or behavior of the incumbent and telling about that pattern, and when it is done collaboratively, coachee can apply that insight at the multiple situation, in the multiple conversations, in the multiple interactions. So, instead of looking at atomistic data, instead of looking at multiple data points about the employee performance, if coach can help, or first coach has to see a pattern, and if he or she is able to see the pattern, that should be communicated to the incumbent. Confidence in the employee, coaching is based on the confidence of the employee. If we do not feel confident that coachee can improve, coaching cannot work. So, confidence is our life energy for the coaching. Coach though keep pointing out the areas of development, they can keep identifying the areas for the improvement of the incumbent, but they need to be confident that with these inputs person can improve. Anyway, it is based on, the coaching is based on the assumption about the wholeness and uniqueness of the individual. So, that is the starting point, but confidence is also equally important. We might remember the Pygmalion effect. Pygmalion effect may, some people may consider to be an extreme articulation of a phenomena, but it has a truth value, and if coach have the confidence in the coachee, coachee also come to the high level of performance. Advice and idea generation is also a component of the feedback conversation. Just giving feedback, just telling that you need improvement over here, or your this behavior was not the most appropriate behavior, and please identify what can be the alternate behavior. Just instead of just saying that, coachee can engage, can be engaged with the coach to generate the ideas and actively seeking advice about what can be done, what else can be done in the similar situation when it occurs in future. So, feedback conversation also includes the idea generation. Coach training is a very flourishing industry and very vibrant field of the current time. There are hundreds of coach training institutions and they are propagating their own models of coaching. Many of them are extremely effective, many of them are very thoroughly designed, and many of them are certified by International Coach Federation. International Coach Federation certifies any coach training program only after very thorough documentation and evaluation. So, there are hundreds of such programs available. I am going to discuss about only one program, which is one of the very popular programs of the coach training given by famous management thinker and influencer Marshall Goldsmith, that is called behavioral coaching or behavioral coaching approach. Behavioral coaching approach follows these steps. Number 1, it involves the leaders being coached in determining the desired behavior in their leadership role. So, the behavioral coaching as proposed by Marshall Goldsmith starts with leader himself or herself identifying what is his or her desired behavior in their leadership role. Without leader identifying the desired role or desired behavior or desired level of performance, at least behavioral coaching cannot start. Second step is it involves leaders being coached in determining key stakeholders. So, here Goldsmith explains that he engaged with the leader, and with the help of the leader or the coachee, it is identified who are the stakeholders of the leader's performance. Since Marshall Goldsmith mostly engaged with business leaders, very senior business leaders in the coaching situation, in the coaching relationship, the word leader is being used for the coachee here. So, leader has to identify who all are the key stakeholders. So, please connect this to the developmental activities plan, developmental plan, where we talk about identifying the key stakeholders and identifying how the development will look like. What is the end result of the developmental intervention or developmental activity? Here they identify who are the stakeholders who can validate about the need for the desired behavior and whether that desired behavior is now being demonstrated after the conscious effort by the leader. After identifying the key stakeholder, coach himself or herself goes to meet these different stakeholders and ask two questions. Question number 1, what this leader, the incumbent, the coachee, what this leader should start or stop doing to be more effective in his or her role. That is question number 1. Question number 2, how you can help him or her to achieve that goal or to start or to help this person to start or stop doing things which you have just mentioned. So, in this way stakeholders are also involved in the coaching of that leader, coaching of that person. They collect feedback, that feedback is collected by the coach, shared with the leader again. Now, leader has his own understanding, her own understanding about what is needed in that particular role to be more effective. Now, she also has the data coming from the multiple stakeholders about what he should or she should start or stop doing. Looking at both the data, looking at both the thoughts, both the sets of observations, it is leader who chooses 2 or 3 learning objectives, which are going to have significant impact on the strategic success of the organization, or which has very important, very crucial impact, very noticeable impact on his or her own performance. So, you can connect this conversation with the basic principles of the coaching which we just now discussed, that coachee, incumbent, is the source of resources and insights. So, that agreement happens looking at both the data sets about the key behavioral change. Then the job of the coach is to have follow up. After some time, coach and the incumbent engage again with the stakeholder for the feed forward. What is feed forward? That is a quick idea about how the person can change his behavior, her behavior, or start doing new things in his or her role. We are going to discuss feed forward in little more detail in the next slide, but feed forward is the important or and a very creative aspect of the coaching conversations between a stakeholder and coachee. This process goes on, coaching goes on, coach keep looking at the keep tracking the performance, being a sounding board, active listener, sometimes helps in generating options, generating alternative behavioral options for the coachee, and that those conversations generally takes place every month. That keeps happening, and after, so Marshall Goldsmith generally follows 6-month cycle. So, after 5-6 months, there is again a conversation with the stakeholders for the review of the incumbent's behavior. There they take stock of things about the leader, whether that person has really moved forward in that particular behavior, which was identified collaboratively by the coach, coachee and stakeholders. And of course, the center of this identification, center of this process is the coachee or the leader. This process continues. Generally, it has a follow up process wherein they look at 2-3 other things to be developed, and the same process is followed, review the result, and the formal coaching process generally after 18 months. That is what being mentioned by Marshall Goldsmith at couple of places, but the cycle can the cycle can last from 6 months to 18 months anywhere. That is one model of the coaching, that is called the behavioral coaching approach. In the behavioral coaching approach, we talked about feed forward. So, we will have some discussion on the feed forward. Feed forward works on 2 basic principles. Feed forward, it is a conversation, a particular type of conversation between a person who is actively seeking developmental feedback, developmental input, and another person who is giving him or her ideas. So, first principle is for someone who has to give idea, who has to give feed forward to the incumbent. What is that? That principle is be helpful as much as you can. So, be generous in giving ideas how you can change the behavior, a particular behavior, or how you can enhance the performance. And second principle is from the perspective of the coachee, that is about learn as much as you can in absorbing what is being shared in the form of feed forward by others. So, process starts with picking up one particular behavior which participant identifies he or she has to change or enhance. That description is given to the other person, and based on that description the other dialogue partner, that person can be a coach, that can be a colleague or the senior colleague, they can give the feed forward to the employee, to this incumbent. That means they can give idea what can enhance your performance in your current role. Again this is popularized by Marshall Goldsmith, and he says that feed forward works almost always, because we cannot change in past. So, this idea about the feed forward is also popularized by Marshall Goldsmith, and he identifies that it work in most of the situation. Why it works is that feedback is generally focused on the past, whereas feed forward is on the future. We cannot change past, we can certainly change future. So, that is why feed forward works. It also works because it can be more productive to help people to be right than to prove them they were wrong. When we are in the process of proving them that they were not best, they were wrong, that may not naturally result into some ideas in the person to how to be more right and how to be more effective. Whereas the feed forward starts from the space of the person being whole and unique, and still person can improve. So, this looks at the future, this looks at something which person can do. Another thing is feed forward is specially suited to the successful people. Successful people generally have very good self image. So, when a feedback is given to them, though it is not supposed to be pointing out mistake, invariably it leads to pointing out the mistakes, and that does not go well with many or most of the very successful people. So, feed forward helps to retain their self image also very well. People do not take feed forward as personally as feedback. Since it is future oriented, this also has inherent choice. Whenever we give feed forward to someone, it inherently includes the choice whether that person follow or does not follow. So, people do not take it as personally as they take feedback, because feedback does not have, or the feedback generally has less choice for a person to accept or not to accept, because if it is data driven, specific, etc., generally it does not have much choice for the person not to accept it. So, they take it little more personally, and feed forward tend to be much faster and more efficient than feedback, because in the feedback sometimes emotions arise, and in the midst of the emotion people at times are not able to follow the next course or the best course of action next moment. Feed forward without touching the sensitive emotions gives the ideas for the future on which person can start working immediately. So, because of these reasons Marshall Goldsmith suggests that feed forward works. Now, we will talk about mentoring. Mentoring is a process in which an experienced individual helps another person to develop his or her goals and skills through a series of conversations and other learning activities. Coaching and mentoring are slightly different. Coaching is generally given for a specific goal, a specific skill, a specific behavior. Mentoring is generally given for the larger purpose, larger goal, long term career path, or long term path of life. So, in this way coaching and mentoring are different in their foci. The key mentoring skills are listening actively, building trust, determining goals, building capacity, encouraging and inspiring. Steps in mentoring are building relationship. Without sound relationship, mentoring cannot flourish. Exchanging the information and setting goals. What mentee wants to achieve, that must be accounted as the very next step after building the relationship, because it is the goal of the mentee which matters at the moment. Even if mentor thinks that mentee can have more audacious goal or a different kind of goal, until it is accepted by the mentee, mentorship will not result into mentee pursuing those goals. So, taking account of the goals, taking account of what is the objective of the mentee at particular moment, that is very important, and that has to be accounted, that is identified as the very next step after building relationship. Then working towards goal and deepening the engagement, that is the longest part. or the essence of mentoring process, wherein there are series of conversations. They can talk about their multiple stakeholders, their multiple life goals, their life situations, challenges, opportunities, what is going on in the business environment, what is happening in the immediate industry environment or general environment. In the context of that, what should be the most optimal goal, where the mentee should set his or her eye as his or her objective. All that conversation is part of this working towards the goal, and lot of mentorship is actually about identifying appropriate life goals, appropriate career paths, and charting out the path which helps the mentee to fulfill his or her aspirations of a ideal life or ideal professional. Then, like any formal relationship, there has to be a proper closure or ending of the mentoring conversation or mentoring relationship. So, in this conversation we started to look at what are the developmental activities, what are the options in the form of developmental activities which can be offered, which can be part of the performance management system of the employees. We discussed about multiple options like on the job training, conferences, attending, joining trade unions, joining the trade organizations, etc. And we looked at two particular developmental activities, coaching and mentoring, in more detail. These are very popular activities, developmental activities in the corporate world. These are applied, these are being used at all the levels of management hierarchy. We also have many coaches who are trained, who are called executive coaches, who are trained in the coaching processes, and they are being hired by the they are being hired by the organizations. Mentoring and coaching can also be integrated within the organization through the HR processing system. So, organizations many organizations rather have started setting up the mentoring process within organization, where mentors are identified for most of the employees, or at least for the high potential employees, and generally the mentors within the organization happen to be 3 or 4 level up in the hierarchy, and they set up the regular conversations, they have their performance agreement form, they have mentor mentee conversation contract. All these things are set up by the HR function to implement the mentoringship within the organization. So, mentoring and coaching can be done by the by the experts external to the organization, as well as can be done internal to the organizations, and nonetheless these are very important developmental activities. In the next session we are going to look at training and development more systematically, because training and development is again, learning and development is called these days, is the very systematic and long term comprehensive activity for the development of the employees, which help organization to achieve its long term objectives. So, we are going to discuss learning and development in the next session. Thank you very much.